from Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and here's what's coming up. K-State's Sandy Johnson is standing by to share information on a spreadsheet that you cow-calf producers can use to better organize and conduct your artificial insemination programs. It's called the Estrous Synchronization Planner. Also today, from the latest Cattle Chat podcast out of the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State, a discussion of agricultural advocacy, what it takes to effectively communicate how agriculture works to the public. Joining Brad White, Bob Larson, and Bob Weaber, a Kansas rancher who was just recognized nationally for her advocacy work, Brandi Buzzard Frobose. And later, K-State's Charlie Lee on mapping out a fish stocking plan as part of farm pond management. Here on Agriculture Today.
When a thunderstorm approaches, follow these safety tips. Lightning, known as the underrated killer, usually strikes the tallest objects, so avoid standing beneath trees or other isolated tall objects. Take shelter in a sturdy building. Remember, if you're close enough to hear thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. Help keep you and your family safe this severe weather season. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
Thanks for tuning in once again for another Agriculture Today. On this first part of the program, some beef cattle-oriented items for you, the first of which being an opportunity for you producers who employ artificial insemination, or AI, in your beef breeding program to latch on to a very handy planner for that purpose, which we'll get into in just a moment. Sandy Johnson recently wrote about this in the newest Beef Tips newsletter out of the Animal Sciences and Industry Department at K-State. Sandy, as you know, is a research and extension beef specialist for K-State based in Northwest Kansas. And before you outline the details of this tool that producers can use here, let's just back up a bit, Sandy, and talk about AI and why producers are gravitating more toward it.
Well, sure. The AI has always allowed producers to use genetics that, number one, weren't right in their backyard, and secondly, they could dream whatever they wanted, and generally they could find genetics to meet their breeding goals. And as we look at the amount of genetic information we now have available to us as a tool, that's even greater. So AI has a great advantage in helping producers reach breeding goals. But secondly, we often incorporate estrous synchronization with that. And even if we used estrous synchronization with natural service sires, we can have some advantages of more calves born earlier. And there may be cases where, whether it's nutritional problems that led to cows not cycling as soon as they could, there's things we can do with estrous synchronization to try and move cows up. So a great tool. Using them both together is even more powerful. And of course, we have excellent systems to really synchronize ovulation now. And essentially, with 3 trips down the chute, we can schedule when we want to breed these cows on our calendar and getting the help there that we need.
Synchronization requires some planning. It just doesn't happen. It's something that needs to be thought out. And there are variables to consider here, and bringing in then this Estrous Synchronization Planner that's out there for producers to use. Talk about that.
Yes, a number of years ago, as we were really making some rapid changes in our estrous synchronization protocols, and really at that point in time, with each breeding season, we were learning something new, and there was a lot of confusion over, somebody would call me and ask me about, what do you know about name your thing sync, but they couldn't tell me what it was. and sometimes I could guess, and there were just a lot of things happening and people trying a lot of different things. And so a group of us said, enough, let's get together, put our data together, and make some solid recommendations based on that information we have. And so really what came out of that is work with not only the AI industry, pharmaceutical companies, those of us that are doing research in this area, a short list of recommended protocols. And at that point, we started working with the Iowa Beef Center, who had initially developed this synchronization planner so that producers could select from this short list of recommended protocols, and essentially it would lay it out on a calendar with the date, time, and specifics of what needs to be done.
Now, those protocols are based on a few standards here, you say: type of cattle, the amount of heat detection that the producer desires, and again, that pivotal breeding date and time. Is that correct?
Right. Those would be the first decisions that you would make in terms of narrowing down the protocols that we have outlined for you. And so really the Estrous Synchronization Planner is an Excel-based tool that kind of steps you through that process, and you stick in a date that you want to start breeding, and depending on if it's a fixed timed AI protocol or not, if it is, then you're also going to say the time of day you want to start breeding, and it's going to develop a calendar. And the very important part of that is that for some of these protocols, if you're not paying attention, and people have done this, they call me and say, well, it says I'm supposed to breed these cows at 3 a.m, and they've already started the protocol because they learned about this tool apparently a little late. Mm-hmm. But the idea is allowing you to plan ahead and make sure what you're planning will actually work, for your labor, daylight, all those things. I mean, sometimes we're relying on other people to come help us, and so we've got to coordinate those schedules. And this is a great tool to allow you to do that and also make sure you're communicating correctly. One thing we want to emphasize with producers is that I think I go back to my thinking about my dad is he might take it as a general suggestion to do it around that sometime that day. But really, the interval we have between removing the feeder and breeding in a fixed timed AI protocol is pretty important. And so we want to try and get people honed in within 3 or 4 hours of that time period. And, that's a key part of this, that we want to help people get that right so they have the best results. And really that's what this is all about, is to try and help people get as good a results as possible by correctly applying the protocols.
And included in those variables, of course, would be the product that the individual producer is going to employ for the synchronization itself. That's to be plugged into this planner then.
Right, because I'm guessing, Eric, if I were to give you a quiz right now on different products, you may have trouble telling me what that product was used for and the appropriate dose to give it. And I think many people would, because unless you work with it every day and are really attuned to this, it's very easy to get them confused, and we don't want that to happen to people. So, yeah, they can indicate what prostaglandin product they're using and what GnRH product, and so that it also will help you get the right product at the right dose, because it's a very common mistake. I'll get a call and it says, well, we just figured out we did this instead of that. What do we do now? So they gave GnRH instead of prostaglandin or vice versa. And so depending on when they figure that out, then we have to develop a new plan.
This really is a manageable spreadsheet. It's quite easy to enter the proper data and come out with a calendar that producers can follow fairly easily, can they not?
Right. It's just, fill in a few little deals and click over to the calendar page, and you can see if you like it or not. And so quick and easy to use, even if you're not really familiar with Excel, and a lot of additional information in there. It'll allow you to put in some costs. You can compare systems much more in depth if you want it. If you just need the dates to get it the right date, it'll do that.
We might mention as a sidebar here, there is a companion product called the Multi-Group Synchronization Planner. If one's wanting to put the data on several groups of females into this longer range calendar, that may not be for every individual producer, but for those who are routinely involved in AI administration, that would be useful as well, Sandy.
Right. And even if you just breed your cows and heifers, we were limited in that original version, essentially puts one protocol on one calendar. Mm-hmm. And so the multi-group version would allow you to show on the same calendar, say, your replacement heifers and your mature cows. And, you may have more groups than that, and others that do a lot of AI have multiple ways they can use it. But it adds some increased flexibility on what you can put in the calendar, and was something that several of our users were hoping that we could get done. And so we're hoping they find that version useful.
So how does one access either of these two versions of the planner then?
Well, you can use the Google tool and just Google Think Planner. It's at the Iowa Beef Center under software. You can go to ksubeef.org, and over on the right-hand side, there's a link to it there. So multiple ways, but Google Think Planner and look for an Iowa State site. Probably take you right there, or email me and I'll make sure to get it to you.
Excellent. The Estrous Synchronization Planner, you can find it handily several ways at ksubeef.org or through the Iowa Beef Center, either way, to make use of this Excel spreadsheet. And Sandy, before we let you go, I want to remind folks that you are on the program, along with your colleague here at K-State, David Grieger, talking about timed AI protocols at the upcoming Cattlemen's Day here at Kansas State University this Friday.
Yes, we hope to give an update on several topics, and then we'll have an open Q&A section so that, as producers have questions on anything related to their breeding program, we can have a discussion in that regard and hopefully get some questions answered.
That'll be one of the breakout sessions at Cattlemen's Day 2020 here at K-State this coming Friday. If you haven't registered for that event, it's time to do so. And you can find out more about that likewise at ksubeef.org. Hey, Sandy, thanks for sharing the time with us and the information on this spreadsheet tool. We appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
That from Research and Extension Beef Specialist Sandy Johnson of Kansas State University. She's based in Colby, northwest Kansas. You can also read more about this Estrous Synchronization Planner in that article that Sandy put together. It's in the latest Beef Tips newsletter, which as well can be found at ksubeef.org. We'll return with more on this Agriculture Today.
Kansas farmers and ranchers are helping feed your family in the world. The largest contributor to the Kansas economy is beef cattle. How do you get that juicy steak on your plate? In order for you to enjoy your tasty meal, it requires the hard work of the producers, marketers, advertisers, processors, inspectors, transporters, packers, and consumers. So thank all these people and sit back, relax, and enjoy your tasty meal.
You're tuned to Agriculture Today, advocating for agriculture, person to person, on social media or otherwise, in the face of misinformation that's circulated about the industry. That was the central topic on the latest Cattle Chat podcast from the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State. Joining the regulars there, veterinarians Brad White, Bob Larson, and cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber, a Kansas cattle producer who has become quite adept at telling agriculture's story and has been recognized accordingly. Her name is Brandi Buzzard Frobose, and Brad tells more about her.
Brandi is the Director of Communications for the Red Angus Association. She also recently won the Beef Advocate of the Year, which is a national award awarded at NCBA, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which happened a couple weeks ago. So we're going to pick her brain on advocacy and how we can promote ag, some of the things we do. We've had questions on that before, but Brandi, you're the expert. What are some of the things, if I say, I think I kind of want to get into this, what are some of the things I should consider?
Well, for me, kind of the decision to start being an advocate, I don't know that I made like an active decision one morning and woke up and said, hey, I want to be an advocate.
I'm going to do this,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
It's not like I woke up and thought, I'm going to apply for that job. It was kind of a gradual thing. But for me, my husband and I we raise purebred cattle on our ranch in southeast Kansas, and we have a daughter, and I want her to take over the ranch. And if she chooses to do so, I want her to, if she has kids and wants to pass it on down to her kids, I want her to be able to do that. And I mean, it's something that I feel like I need to do.
And when we think about being able to answer some of the questions that people have, and Bob, you've talked about that before, as far as how do we answer some of those questions, or how do we even be open to them?
Yeah, I think one of the real key things is being able to understand the position that somebody is in that asked the question, right? Because oftentimes they'll base their decision on some other piece of potentially non-factual information or personal experience, and unless you pause and ask those probing questions, you never get the opportunity to sort of understand their position and where they're coming from. And if you just lob out some kind of message and solution without understanding the problem, you're kind of at an impasse in that. You haven't convinced them or changed their opinion effectively by doing that.
I'm talking to myself as much as anybody else, because I can get frustrated, angry even. But the reality, occasionally, the reality is people I care about. So I've got a large family, meaning cousins, first cousin, second cousin, 14 cousins, whatever, that I interact with. And some of them have now been away from the farm for a couple of generations, and they say some things at family reunion or Christmas dinners, Thanksgiving dinners, that if I didn't have a good relationship with them, I might either shut down or get angry. But the fact that I have a good relationship with them allows me to respond more appropriately. And the lesson I try to remind myself is to treat people I don't know with that same kind of respect, because oftentimes their concerns are my concerns. I want my kids to have a healthy diet. I want the planet to be healthy. I want these things too. And that's a commonplace for us to meet. Now then, your factoid that you threw out at me that got me kind of bowed up, if I can start with where we agree, then I don't get quite so, let's say, Brandi, I probably wouldn't be an effective advocate if I'm just angry.
Exactly. You wouldn't be very effective at all, honestly.
So you've got to, and you said several things there, you've got to kind of pick your battles. You've got to be thick-hided to some degree, and you've got to listen to understand, not just listen to...
I probably agree with their very basic. So even people that I totally disagree with on animal agriculture, I want a safe food supply. I want nutritious food. That we can agree on. Reminding myself that I have commonality, because sometimes my default is that I don't have anything in common with this person.
One of the things that sort of strategy of stopping asking a question, it does, I think, two things. One is it helps me understand the perspective of the other person better, but it also gives me a minute or two to get my head right about, I can't just light into this person, right? I gotta think sentiently here, and I gotta have a good argument, and I need to understand their perspective. And so that strategy can really help take my emotions down a notch and be able to calmly answer the question.
And you guys gave some examples of different places that you can interact. What can I do locally? Is there anything I can do locally?
I think local is really important because I live in an ag rural community, but there's a lot of people that, they're not directly tied to the farm. So people that have influence, people on the school board, county commissioners, just friends and family, who actually I need their support to continue. If somebody that has zoning ability or input on the type of operation that I can build over time, I want them to understand the business that I'm in. I want the school board to understand the food that we're producing. So there's, even in a rural community in Kansas, there's a lot for me, because I don't know if I'm really going to be active on Twitter or blogging or something like that, but there's people at church and at school events that I need to be talking to.
So you can act locally, and that leads us to our Cattle Chat checklist for today, which is our top 7 items that you can do to be a better advocate.
Number 7, stay in your lane. So know what you know and be willing to talk about that and have confidence with it.
Number 6, don't boycott. It's better to be engaged than enraged. There are much better ways to make an impact.
Number 5, be open to questions. We can't just go out and state our point of view only. We have to be available to have people ask us questions and be able to provide those answers.
Yeah. Number 4, pick your battles. Don't take as a throwdown fight every insult that you might receive.
Number 3, have a thick hide. If you can't take being called a bad mom every once in a while, better sit this one out.
Number 2, listen to understand. So be open to those questions and ask some probing questions to really get at the basis and perspective of the person that you're talking to.
Number 1, local focus. You don't have to be on social media to make an impact. There are lots of ways to have a positive impact and focus your energy at home.
And we just talked about advocacy. One of the things, Brandi, that you've done is you've been very active on social media. You've got a blog. You've put some things out. And recently, and we'll post a link in our show notes, but recently one of the blogs that you wrote was on environmental sustainability and talked a lot about the sustainability topic. And I want to start this discussion off with, what feedback have you received on that article?
Well, so kind of the biggest thing that people say is, or the, I guess, critics of animal agriculture is that they're very big on bashing cows and livestock for climate change. And so they're giving up
greenhouse gas.
Yeah,
right.
Greenhouse gases. They just throw that term out there without any regard to the fact that methane and carbon dioxide are very different in their like biological life cycle in the atmosphere. But the biggest comments I get are people just really focus on that cows are belching and the resources that go into creating beef. But I challenge people to think about, for example, like what was the population 100 years ago in the United States? It was like 107 million, and today it's like 330 million. So obviously, as our population has grown, the number of cars have grown. We have phones now, we have TVs, we have air conditioning.
The number of kilowatts of energy we consume the number of kilowatts that we consume as Americans just kind of keeps going up and up and up.
Right. And so like 100 years ago in 1920, we were not flying from LA to Paris. So you think about like transatlantic flights and just, I'll just hop on a plane. I do it all the time when I have to go to my office, the home office for Red Angus in Denver. I'll get on a flight in Kansas City and go to Denver and work for like a project and either come home that night or come home the next day, which from a carbon standpoint is really not helpful, but from a convenience standpoint is very convenient. So like the convenience and the consumerism and just the development of technology in the United States, I don't see how you can look at all that and think that cows are responsible when honestly over the past 40 years, the number of cows we have in the United States has honestly dropped. So for me, it's just, if you look at the numbers and the facts, it's pretty blatantly clear that cows are not the culprit.
To me, one of the things is to really to agree that sustainability is important, and cattle as a part of, I can't imagine anything more natural than cattle grazing grass, being involved in the cycle of nature. And is that not a sustainable message, that nature itself, that the plants, animals, sunlight, the things we learned in grade school biology, isn't that a sustainable ecosystem? Is that a place where we can engage in this conversation and remind people that animals and plants and sunlight are all part of a cycle?
Absolutely, I think so. I mean, when I go and feed cows in this never-ending wet winter, on the cornfield, the corn stalks that our cattle graze are crop residue. You can't use corn stalks to feed humans, so they're recycling that, and the mama cows are turning that into milk, which is going to feed the baby calves, which are going to eventually be in the beef supply. On that same cornfield, there are hundreds of Canadian geese and snow geese. Their deer are jumping through my electric fence on a daily basis. So I have to fix that. I mean, you don't see that presence of wildlife and natural ecosystem if you turn up all the dirt and put concrete on it and build a condominium area. And we need cities, but also we need to preserve our ranch and farmland.
Along with K-State's Bob Larson, Bob Weaber, and Brad White, a cattle producer and leading beef industry advocate from southeast Kansas, Brandi Buzzard Frobose. Hear the entire podcast at beefcattleinsitute.org. We'll be back with more on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And next up for you, today's agricultural news headlines. These courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the USDA is back to issuing its weekly crop progress and condition report for Kansas. And as of this past weekend, our topsoil moisture supplies in the state were rated at 16% surplus, 64% adequate, 20% at short to very short. Subsoil moisture, 11% surplus, 69% adequate, and again 20% short to very short. The condition of the Kansas winter wheat crop this week is at 42% good to excellent, 37% fair, and 20% poor to very poor, according to the USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service. In addition, the USDA has just posted its 2020 Kansas Wheat Varieties Report. SY Monument is the top planted variety this year. It's seen a gradual increase in the overall share of Kansas wheat acreage since 2015. It accounts this year for 9.7% of the wheat planted acres. Zinda, which was new to the top 10 last year, the second most popular variety at 6.4%. WB Grainfield at third, 5.3%. And the fourth most popular variety, Winterhawk, at 3.9% of the acreage. Acres planted to Everest continued to decline, but it remained in fifth place at 2.9%. Rounding out the top 10, T158 in sixth place, 2.8%. LCS Mint maintaining seventh place at 2.6%, and TAM 114 and TAM 111 also representing 2.6% of the planted acres. Lastly, in the top 10, Double Stop CL Plus, rounding the list out at 2.3%. Blends, accounting for just over 11% of the state's planted acreage. That's down from 13.5% last year. Hard white wheat varieties, accounting for just over 4% of the state's acreage. That's up from 3.5% last year. The variety Joe was the leading hard white wheat variety at 2.3%. That's out just recently, as of yesterday, as a matter of fact, from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Kansas wheat varieties planted for 2020 harvest. March the 15th is the deadline for you producers to purchase crop insurance for your spring-planted crops. That date also important to those producers who accepted federal prevented planting top-up payments last year. Here's more from the USDA's Rod Bain.
An important deadline is fast approaching for crop producers nationwide.
Deadline coming up is our March 15th sales closing date
for crop insurance on spring-planted crops. And USDA Risk Management Agency Administrator Martin Barbary says that date takes on greater significance to those farmers who received prevented planting top-up payments last fall.
Those producers, in taking that top-up, have a 2-year commitment to buy crop insurance. They got the top-up because they were buying crop insurance.
Yet Barbary explains those producers who took top-up payments have until their crop insurance sales closing date to pay their previous year's premiums. Otherwise,
they go on what we call ITS and becomes ineligible for crop insurance. It's double whammy because they won't be eligible for crop insurance in 2020, and because they can't meet that commitment, they'll have to pay the top-up back.
He adds producers facing difficulty making premium payments can work with their local crop insurance agent to make written payment arrangements and remain eligible for crop insurance. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Noting also here that spring crop insurance guarantees for corn and soybeans are the lowest since 2016, which means you producers will have less protection against lower prices in your revenue policies here in 2020. At $3.88 per bushel for corn, $9.17 per bushel for soybeans, those guarantees are down 12 cents and 37 cents respectively from last year. The spring guarantee is computed by averaging the daily close of the December 2020 corn and the November 2020 soybean futures contracts through the month of February. Commodity prices dropping in the last week of the month, as you know, as global markets responded to the accelerating spread of the new coronavirus. Quoting here the director of the Center for Commercial Agriculture at Purdue University, Jim Mintert, you've got a lower benchmark, a lower revenue guarantee, so you're getting less coverage than you would otherwise. He went on to say, from a farmer's perspective, in his words, it's a bummer that the market collapsed this past week. Coming your way next, this week's edition of Milk Lines with K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook. Mike?
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy farmers considering rumen-protected lysine for transition and pre-fresh cows. There's been a lot of research done over the years looking at rumen-protected amino acids for our lactating cows. However, there's some new data that's coming out that is showing that there may be some benefit to feeding animals rumen-protected amino acids prior to calving. Most of our farms, we have a transition period that's about 3 weeks prior to calving. It has been shown that feeding some supplemental rumen-protected lysine during this period can increase the performance during the lactation as well as increase the health as well as the weight of calves coming from dams that have been fed these supplemental amino acids. So, is this cheap? No, it is not. It's actually fairly expensive to do. In fact, if you look at just feeding a rumen-protected amino acid for 21 days prior to calving, probably cost you about $5.40 to do that. However, when you look at the increase in milk production that you might obtain after that animal calves, particularly if you look at the next 21 days in lactation, that would give you a yield of about $9.90. So the return there is about 1 to 1.84. So it's not too bad a return, but maybe not as high as you'd like. So what if you fed amino acids, rumen protected, both before and after calving? That would increase your return on investment, according to a study, and actually increase it to about 2.66 for every dollar invested. What if you just fed those supplemental amino acids 21 days after freshening? Well, that actually lowers your return. So the benefit seems to be, in terms of increasing milk production, to feeding those supplemental amino acids both before and also after calving. The impact on the calves would be due to the feeding of supplemental amino acids prior to calving, again, just for 21 days. And based on animals that calved, that had been fed supplemental amino acids, their calves were healthier. In other words, they had higher immunoglobulins found in the blood for the first 14 days of life as compared to those animals that did not receive supplemental amino acids. So, as you talk to your nutritionist, you might want to consider whether or not feeding some supplemental rumen-protected lysine pre-calving and post-calving would be a solution for maybe some of the issues that you're seeing on your dairy. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension.
All right, Mike, many thanks to you, and we'll return shortly with more here on Agriculture Today.
For information on threatening weather, you should depend on the National Weather Service and their broadcast on NOAA Weather Radio. NOAA Weather Radio is an all-hazards radio network that provides up-to-the-minute weather information, including life-saving warnings anytime, day or night. NOAA Weather Radio also broadcasts information on man-made disasters, such as chemical spills, amber alerts, or other national emergencies. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
We're back now on Agriculture Today, and time once again to visit with Charlie Lee, wildlife specialist with K-State Research and Extension. He's by our way every Tuesday right here. Well, back to, Charlie, farm pond management, and as you put it, by the calendar. You like those who manage farm ponds, existing and new, to follow steps as the calendar rolls.
Well, spring is an excellent time to, if you've got a new pond, to begin stocking fish, but there's probably some things that need to be considered prior to stocking fish. A lot of people think you build a new pond, you put fish in, and that's going to result in a good fish population. But there are some things like understanding water chemistry that's important, understanding the need to establish a food chain or food web at the very bottom, and then putting in the proper bait fish and then sport fish numbers so that the proper stocking order needs to be followed. So typically I like to think the first step is to try to get phytoplankton, which are those very small one-celled plants that turn the water a pea green type coloration. Phytoplankton is very important, and if they're not there, then other levels of the food chain are not going to thrive. So if you have water that's a slight greenish tint, something that, let's say, you don't have more than 24 inches of visibility, probably doesn't need any sort of fertilizer added in order to get phytoplankton established. And there's very few farm ponds in Kansas that require the addition of fertilizer. Yet many farm pond owners have looked on the web, they see the need to fertilize farm ponds, and they fail to recognize that Kansas ponds that are typically filled with crop field runoff have adequate nutrients and often will develop a phytoplankton bloom on their own.
So one could do more harm than good by over-fertilization of an existing pond?
Yes, most certainly. Too much fertilizer in the pond, too many nutrients, whether they're applied intentionally or come in through watershed runoff, you can certainly stimulate aquatic plant growth to levels that then you must deal with excess aquatic plants. So I would encourage people, as soon as the pond is constructed or if it's been a renovated pond, that they plant some sort of vegetative material immediately in the bottom. Whatever type of product they've got that will come up quick, it's fairly inexpensive. It doesn't really matter. Wheat is often used, sometimes annual rye, sometimes brome. Just get something growing in the bottom of the pond. Let it get up 2 or 3 inches in height, and then hope you got water to begin the process.
All right, then, to strategically, as you stress, strategically stocking a farm pond, it's about stocking rates and proportion of species, you say?
Yes, I like to start with bait fish initially, usually fathead minnows. They're a fish that's been used for centuries as bait for small predator fish such as crappie or largemouth bass. They're a good live bait, but they provide this forage for ponds that are commonly stocked with bluegill or largemouth bass. They begin spawning very early in the spring and can often spawn multiple times before the bluegill spawn, so that they're providing a valuable food resource for the small bass fingerlings, which will eventually be introduced into the pond. You can enhance the substrate of a pond to get more fathead minnows to reproduce. They're upside-down spawners. They lay eggs on the underneath side of substrate. That can be flat rocks laid on smaller rocks so that they're not flat against the pond bottom. Some folks have used cedar shingles. They stick them in the pond banks at about a 45-degree angle. Others have used waxed cardboard boxes like frozen meats come in. They just let those float around on the pond surface. Fathead minnows do a great job of reproducing on that substrate. Once you have the forage fish well established, it's time to put in the bluegill. Oftentimes we start with 500 bluegill or 400 bluegill and 100 red-eared sunfish in the initial stocking. Then the next year you would put in 100 largemouth bass fingerlings or 100 channel cat fingerlings. That seems to be one of the approaches that has a proven success record. And if people follow that recipe, I think most of the time they're going to have a fairly successful pond.
But there's a key to remember there. You're putting in your game fish a year after you establish those food fish.
Yes, you want the forage fish to get a good start, allow some substrate to begin growing, some aquatic plants on the sides, so that eventually when you introduce the predator fish, the forage fish that you have places to hide and reproduce rather than being in the same part of the water column as your predator fish.
Well, then lastly, Charlie, moving on down the calendar year, what other things should folks be looking at in as far as pond management in general?
Well, eventually you're going to need to get an idea of your fishery pond balance. After about year 3, people could start keeping fish that they catch out of the pond. I typically tell folks they can fish as soon as they want in a pond, but don't keep any fish out of the pond until year 3. Keep in mind what the sizes of those fish are. I like to see fish that are of several different age classes. So you want small bluegill, you want medium-sized bluegill, you want large bluegill. The same thing with largemouth bass. Fish of all sizes in a pond means that pond is likely in balance, so check that as you do fishing. Then keep a record of what you're catching. By keeping a record of what species you catch, the number that are caught per hour, you can compare records for multiple years and, again, have a good idea of the productivity of your pond or when to take steps for needed action. Then finally, you need to do a good job of harvesting. I don't like to see more than about 25 to 30 pounds of largemouth bass taking out of an acre of water each year. It's rare that you're going to over-harvest the forage fish like young bluegill, and the fathead minnows are going to be consumed after the first year or two, and you'll have to rely on bluegill as the forage fish producers.
The thought here, though, is that you need to line out a management plan for that pond for optimum fishing experiences. These are some things to think about to start in that direction. Charlie, thanks for the word on farm pond management and a calendar to follow. Charlie Lee is a wildlife specialist with K-State Research and Extension. And our time is away once again. Thanks for tuning in. Please rejoin us here tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.